All right. Thanks for that. We didn't actually tell my kids it was my birthday because it's just too complicated being at a conference today. So when you have to introduce Stewart Gleadow and Prasanna Gopalakrishnan, usually the name mess up goes the other way. Although Simon said he's good with names because his mum's actually from India. She was born in Calcutta. We said, "What's her name?" And he said, "Helen." So Prasanna and I are both tech leads at REA. As Simon mentioned, Prasanna's responsible for the realestate.com.au app, our flagship product, the one that most of you would use if you're looking for property in Australia. And I work with our group architecture team, still mostly focused on mobile and looking at some of our practices and implementations across the company. And this is a bit about our journey of how mobile has scaled over the last 8 years or so, some of the challenges we've had and solutions we're putting in place. And it's really a parallel journey to what Tom presented earlier around our kind of platform and collab journey, although some of the constraints on mobile are a little bit different. So we want to look at a little bit about REA and why we got to this point of scaling and some of the challenges that we had scaling mobile. And there's a couple of different solutions we've been trying to put in place, both around how we approach delivery and planning and collaboration, and also around architecture driven by that organisational need. So that's our federated delivery and mobile architecture, and a few tips that we've learnt along the way. The journey's by no means finished, but this is kind of a snapshot of where we are now in that journey, and a few things with the benefit of hindsight as well. So as I mentioned, our app has about 8 million downloads, which for a global app is not huge, but for an Australian app, that's massive. And a huge number of them are active month on month. So the kind of engagement levels we get with our mobile application is really large, and particularly for this audience, we've really saturated the market. It is the place to look for property. And it really highlights why we've needed to invest really heavily in doing this well and executing well on mobile. Just to give an idea of how that's scaled over time, this is the bottom line is our mobile app usage, and the top is our web usage over the last 6 years or so. And you can see that it's really we're a growing company, so everything's growing, except those little troughs in January when no one uses it. I assume that's what it is. But you can see while everything's growing, our app usage just keeps on growing and growing and becoming more and more important. And so about this point in the middle is where we identified that we really needed to invest heavily in mobile. It started off as a bit of a sideshow, a small thing on the side, and it became a really key part of our business and a large audience that actually is becoming mobile only, and the only way they experience our products is through the mobile app in their pocket. And the scaling model for that has been different. If you look at relating to what Tom talked about in terms of how we scaled our organisation and many teams, this is a graph he generated a few years ago around the bottom line is the number of engineering staff we have, and the top line is the number of systems we're creating, which is scarily growing exponentially. This is mostly predictive, but if you actually took a slice at December 2018, we're pretty close. I think you mentioned 500 odd people and 1,000 odd systems. It's surprisingly accurate where we're at. And that shows the way that we've scaled outside of mobile, which is basically more teams that were completely autonomous, building more and more systems. And so now we're on a journey with collab and platforms around how do we actually combine that and find leverage both in platform teams and product teams. For mobile, it's been a slightly different journey because we couldn't slice up our business into 100 different apps and just stitch it all together with Akamai and it all looks like the same system. It technically doesn't work like that. So it's always been one big application, one big code base that's submitted. And so through most of this journey, we've only had one central mobile team that were essentially the gatekeepers and the core skills maintaining our mobile applications, even though the rest of our business has scaled significantly through that time.
I don't have a mic. I'll stay here for not long enough, letting out in comfort. I'm good, I think. Can everyone hear me? Yeah.
When the mobile team was formed at REA around 8 years ago now, we were all trying to figure out how this mobile thing would pan out. We created a separate team of mobile developers, and in that context of uncertainty, that kind of made sense in that we wanted the teams to have the focus and autonomy to go after the core features they were building out from the website. Features like search, map, property details, saving a property, saving a search, etc. So all those things were not available in the mobile apps, and we were building it out from the start. So that really helped. As the mobile apps started getting used more and more, and the people were coming back to it more often, they were using it more for longer periods of time, and it looked like mobile was not going away. Other business units, other teams inside REA wanted to start putting their products into mobile first, naturally. And being the only team that could do mobile work, the mobile development, it made sense for this mobile team to start taking on some of that work. They started adding some of these features for these teams into the mobile apps. Fast forward to a couple of years ago, and this happened. So we started seeing that there's a lot of business units, and even more products being added into the mobile apps by this one core team. And the mobile team was having to send away most of these business units. And even with that, even with only working on a fraction of the things that we were getting demand for, we still did not have the time to focus on consumer experience and all the things that we wanted to do as well. So at this stage, the mobile teams had become the bottleneck for the whole organization. You can only have a certain number of hands under the hood of the engine at the time, and we can't just throw more people at it at this stage, and you need to kind of increase the surface area, expand the surface area of the code base using architecture and organizational structures. An interesting side effect of the mobile teams becoming a bottleneck was that the business units started to get their products into the mobile apps the fastest way they know how to, web views. They started they had web developers, they did not have any mobile developers, and so they started adding in more and more web views into the apps. We were seeing that the users of the apps will come into the apps and stay for minutes instead of seconds in the website because of the good user experience, and then we were bringing them in and then taking them to more and more web views, which is not great for consumer experience. And on the flip side, we'll go back. It goes straight to the start. On the flip side, there were a couple of business units who really understood the benefits of native development, and they were very happy to hire mobile developers, and they started working on the main app, and they went away and started working on this for a couple of months, and overwhelmingly the feedback was that it was just simply too hard. They had to understand a lot of the core concepts and the history of the code base. They couldn't make even small changes without understanding the world of mobile development. Not only that, they had to do that twice because the knowledge that they got from working on iOS did not translate at all to Android and vice versa. This led us to rethinking the way we approach delivery from an organizational point of view.
So internally, some people, Pete Moran, who's here, was a big part of this, started looking at different delivery models and trying to explain how we might have multiple teams contributing into, even though we had this one team, single backlog, one big code base, and came up with this concept of federated delivery and some different levels of that. Interesting, I was kind of reading a bit about the Australian Federation recently. So one of the big things is, like Federation talks about, you come together as a whole, but you still maintain independence in a bunch of internal affairs. And I think that's actually a really important aspect of this. If you just come together all for a common goal, you're basically creating one big team, and it has a bunch of other downsides. So it's trying to come together and ship software together, but you're still maintaining independence and autonomy within that. With the Australian Federation, I was looking at whether, there's some clause about New Zealand can join Australia at some stage. Oliver's laughing. I was thinking maybe there's a way where New Zealand could join the Australian Federation and we could take their Prime Minister. because we don't seem to be that good at creating our own. They said we could have Russell Crowe, but we can't have Jacinta Ardern, unfortunately. So if you look at these different levels of maturity models, someone pointed out that maybe Troy drew this picture. Is that right? I can't see Troy anywhere. So all of these modes of operation are probably happening within your organisation already, but sometimes giving things names and trying to codify it really helps have conversations around it. And so the point we're at initially with one mobile team and this single backlog and bottleneck was really this level 0 around roadmap alignment. The way you got stuff into mobile was to align the roadmaps so you ship the same thing at the same time and work together. That works at a very small scale. It really doesn't scale at all. So we need to look at ways that we can get increasing levels of autonomy within that. And so one is just throwing more people at the problem and hiring people in other teams and contributing without really making technical and planning change. And we call that level 1 internal open source, and you can send pull requests into the code base. As Prasanna mentioned, the feedback you get, if you haven't got a system that's designed to have many people contributing independent components, that's quite problematic. And so you can do that up to a point, but again, it doesn't really scale. So it's really levels 2 and 3 where we start to gain independence both in our planning and delivery and autonomy in those teams. So looking at independent federated delivery, we want to come up with an architecture that allows independent components to be contributed from different places and still have custodianship of a central architecture. And level 3 having a provider-consumer kind of model as well. I think if you didn't have the constraints of bundling a mobile app together and shipping it to the store, if you could do it like we do on the web where we have lots of independent systems that are all deployed to production separately, that level 3 and that provider-consumer model is probably gives you greater leverage, but it's because of the technical constraints on the mobile platforms, actually having Google and Apple wanting that big single binary, it's a little bit harder. So we need to look at what did that actually mean? If we want to have this delivery model where we had numerous teams coming in and owning individual components, what would that look like? And so most people think of the REA application as you go and you search for a suburb and you go and view a bunch of listings. But there's actually, even within that, there's all these other components in there around new developments and big apartment buildings have their own products. We have different property showcases, media, maps, residential listings, all these other things. And that's all just looking at basically our listing search results. That's not including all the other things that we do within our business. And so once we decided that we wanted to have this federated model where a number of different teams would all contribute in, that organizational need and that business need starts to drive a need for an architecture that supports that, because we didn't have that previously.
Let's talk a little bit about the technical architecture that we put in place to allow for a federated delivery model. Let's talk a little bit about this, and we start with some of the goals that we put in place for this architecture. We wanted to be able to support all federated teams in the business in contributing to key areas of the apps. If at the start we're not able to contribute to the whole app, it's only the couple of areas of the apps, that's fine. We optimize for creating a good architecture in those areas and then scaling it out to other areas. The federated team should be able to focus on their own content and not have to understand the infrastructure of how things go into where. Like Stu said before, they should have autonomy inside their own areas. And similar ways of contributing across iOS and Android. We started saying that many of the mobile developers are either iOS or Android primary, and when they come in and work on one of the platforms, their knowledge of that platform should easily translate to the other. And obviously, we wanted to do this. We can't take 8 months or 10 months off and do just this. We wanted to do this in small chunks while we're delivering customer value month by month. At the core of this architecture is the way for these federated teams to be able to register and say, I can provide content to certain key areas of the apps, key screens of the apps. Like Stu showed before, search results is we said that's one of our key areas, and there is a lot of demand from federated teams to contribute content into. And these are all the different types of contents that you just saw in screenshots before, like listings, hub sponsorship, banner ads, and all these kind of things. And we group them into modules. These are the team structures. These are the federated teams, and each of those products go into their own modules that are owned by these teams. You can see that the organizational structure is reflected directly in the architecture. So inside those modules, the teams have autonomy. Next is a way for the search results, these modules to register and say, I'm able to provide these kinds of content to the search results. So when the search results has some kind of a data, it is able to give it to ask one of these modules and get the views back, and the views are completely handled in the apps. Next aspect of this architecture is a mobile companion API. This is a backend for front-end pattern. Companion API acts as an aggregation layer between the apps and the upstream APIs. What does it look like? It looks like the companion API gets a type of presentation model, what we call a presentation model. It is not a model. It is not representative of a listing completely. It only gives you the information enough for you to display that in the apps. So the companion API gives the data, and the apps act like the layout engine for that data. So this allows us to, for all this transformation logic that happens in the apps, where you're getting some data and then converting it into a displayable thing, which is a lot of logic, that all that moves away from the apps and it goes into the companion API. And if you want to make any of these changes back into the you don't have to make a new release to the App Store. All that happens in the backend. Another thing that important to this is we didn't want a way for in JSON and in the way we have the transportation protocol, we wanted a way for us to move away from talking about the contracts and what the backend team is creating and what are we consuming, what the transformation is. And we wanted to talk about domain modeling. What does the data imply, and and that should be our focus of it. And we wanted a smaller payload than the JSON as well. And we started using protocol buffers, and they've been working really well for this, in that it's the same model across the backend, the companion API, the iOS, and the Android apps. So you're not really talking about what you're defining in the backend, you're converting in the clients, and all that goes away. With this in place, you get a little bit of a nice dynamicism in that you can, once you have all these elements on the screen, so the top item there, the branding strip, the carousel, and all these items there, from the companion API, you're able to put together dynamic new things which you have not defined in the apps. When you're putting together a completely new product that are not defined by many of these things, you will want to update the app. But most of these things, if you already have, and you're just changing the order of things, changing the size of things, and these minor changes can all be controlled by the companion API. You don't have to make an app update at all, which is really nice. We've been proving that out over the last few months, and it's working really nicely. Next big thing is with these things in place, we started saying that most of these business units wanted some of the core, like the core UI elements specific to the domain of real estate, right? The agent image at the top and the carousel, you want to be able to see the property photos. These new and opens, like that's a little UI element that you use often in many different teams. This agent image, that's between a new development and residential, all of those have that as well. And this beds, baths, and cars, all of those things are often used, and if you leave it up to the teams, they will create their own different UI elements, and they'll be slightly different in each of these places, and we do not want the user experience to suffer because of that. So what we decided to do was we created a library of these elements in something called a common UI, where these become available to the core teams, to the federated teams. become available to the federated teams, and they can take it and use it at any given point of time. And if at a point, like when they're creating a new UI element, they'll create it in their own silos, in their own modules. And if they see that, if they see that another team can use this, then they'll contribute it back to common UI. And there are certain rules around what you can put it into common UI because we want it to be degrade gracefully. This is some examples of all the elements that are available in the common UI at the moment, and there are more coming all the time. So as we building out new products, this gets more things get added here, and we want this to be truly things that are useful across many teams. It's not just a hodgepodge of all sorts of UI elements. Around this point is when we started thinking about, okay, that's great for search results. We have a really nice architecture and we would like to use this. We have seen that this is proving out. And we started thinking about looking at all the other screens in the app. Search results, it is a very similar pattern in most of the screens in the apps. It is a long list of scrollable items which have products from other teams. And we took this that list and created a core a UI component called a universal list, and that is the core of our new, any screen that you want to federate, new teams, could be the federated teams, can take the universal list and start making new screens from. Now that the architecture is in place, let's talk a little bit about the delivery and component ownership.
So we talked a little bit how this architecture was driven by an organizational need of having which is very common, I'm sure you know. So we started off with all these different components essentially being owned by one team and manage them. And even having other people contribute in is difficult if you haven't planned for that in the architecture. So having a separated component model and allowing completely separate parts of our business, different people, sometimes different code bases, just contributed in as libraries, and really decoupling that ownership. And so that's where we're at now. Some components are more separated than others, and certainly in the future, as Prasanna mentioned, we're rolling out this kind of pattern across different screens within the application. So from an organizational point of view, if you go back a couple of years, this is largely what our mobile capability looked like at REA. When we said with this one big core team, that's really talking about realestate.com.au. We also had a commercial application for commercial property off on the side, which is a much smaller team. And we started having other teams contribute in, and that's where we saw this challenge. And so with that new architecture in place, this is basically where we're at now in terms of our mobile capability. So a few things you'll notice that there's already a number of teams, these federated satellite teams that are contributing in components into these code bases. We built a new app for our customers as well, so we now have kind of 3 core apps that we're managing. And in line with what Tom said earlier, trying to build a platform capability and delivering customer value, you have different goals, and it's really hard to achieve both. You don't get a platform just as a side effect of shipping features to customers. And so while the platform journey is slightly different in the mobile space from a technical point of view, that same shift in mindset and around product management is starting to come in as well. So that core team, rather than just keeping on growing, is now split into a few separate teams, some of which are focused on core consumer value. And one of which, that core team, their actual responsibility is maintaining that architecture, and their success is driven by the ability for other people to contribute in to that code base. That's looking at that same separation, that platform mindset versus a product mindset in those teams. So those same aspects are playing out in this space in a slightly different way. I think my clicker's going dead. And that's not to discount the collab journey that Tom was talking about, where the lock product that he mentioned, that authentication across all REA products, that has to be in the mobile applications as well. And so that's being rolled out at the moment. And again, there's a central capability and a central ownership of that with the lock team. And that's their product and their goals around adoption and usage of that with internal customers. And that's being used and leveraged in one of those applications already and soon to be other applications as well. And I like to think that this next product, when you look at the collab assessment and things like that, as our mobile capability expands and as we look at the amount of usage we have in that space, that we could see more and more mobile-specific platform solutions coming out at REA that allow us to deliver quickly while still maintaining autonomy. So just looking back with a little bit of hindsight on that now, it's quite important to identify the right time to scale. As Tom mentioned, if you're a single team, single backlog, one value stream, you likely don't need to put some of these structures in place. It's quite easy just to collaborate as a close-knit team. But what we've found is when your business, depending on how your business is structured, this stuff is really driven by your business structure and how value is defined. But if your business is defined with multiple separate units, separate value streams, with a different rhythm and cadence and planning, you start to head down this path and you need to allow that decoupling between different units. And also, even if you only have one team and one kind of core value prop, as you know, as soon as your teams get to 15, 20 people, they start to fall apart. So you start to put in some of these structures anyway. But I think largely it's driven by the separate business units. And in terms of the right way to scale, if you can scale by building platform components that are leveraged and built upon and used by other teams, like the shipper product that Tom mentioned that we use for Dockerizing applications and deployment, that's great. I think that's a great way of scaling and having that independence and improving productivity at scale. But it's also worth looking at if you have these constraints, particularly around UIs, both web UIs and mobile applications, then these other architectural patterns are also really applicable to that.
To be able to scale in this federated model, we found that we really need trust between these business units, these federated teams. When you get a PR, you should be able to have a conversation about what is wrong without having a blame game. And that we've done this by secondments and early close collaboration at the early stages of a project, or like when the federated teams start working, and that we're seeing is a very important part. And the next part of this is as a second step to that, we are looking at adding documentation and training. So the core team is not the bottleneck again. If you want to be working with the core team to build trust, any kind of trust, that is not going to scale again. And so we're building out a place where we are creating this documentation which is easy to follow. And this does not discount the hard problems of aligning product and UX. That is still a problem that needs to be solved, and we need to keep working on that as well. We're in this journey, like Stu said before, this is where we are right now. By no means have we finished on this path, but we can already see that the surface area of the mobile apps is greatly expanded, and we can see that there are multiple federated teams that are able to work parallelly today, and that's great. That's us.
Thanks.